So maybe because now you are all very experienced users of hearing technologies, and you deal well with this. You are advocate in this domain. You all, and but you three, I think you were like children or teenager with hearing loss, and maybe I'd like to know if by that time did you struggle psychologically with hearing loss? Did you have any difficulty of start using the technology, and how you see that kind of difficulty that we encounter every time in the office with teenagers and children? How it was for you three?
So Sigrid, of course, lost her hearing when she was 3. So her experience is different from the experience that I had. Although I was born prematurely, my hearing loss was not very evident until later. I would lose about 1 dB per year. I started wearing hearing aids at 13. And of course, my hearing has gotten worse about 1 dB per year, but the hearing aids have been getting better. so I've managed to survive. It was awkward for me to wear hearing aids because I was the only kid in school that had them. And you had to fuss around with the batteries. And like I say, when you discover girls, there's awkwardness about having to go change a battery right in the middle of, something. So it was, for a period of time, I felt not ashamed, but just awkward about having to cope with my hearing aids. But as I've gotten older, I'm very upfront about saying, listen, I can't hear very well. So, you need to sit over here, or I have to sit with my back to the wall. And I would guess that Sigrid and Donna and Paula all have found coping mechanisms to figure out how to cope with what they know is coming. So if it's a dinner party somewhere, or it's some other event where there's going to be background noise and things like that, you with enough experience, you begin to deliberately take charge of what your circumstances are, and don't allow yourself to be forced into a situation that's overly stressful. So I'm curious, I don't know, Sigrid, I know that you used to have a tough time preparing for a dinner party because you knew you were only going to lip read, we couldn't have too many people, and you were really tired at the end of the meal.
I remember, thank you for reminding me. About 20 years ago, I realized that it took very careful planning to put together a dinner party where I could completely forget what I had made to eat and focus on the conversation. And I even taught a class in cooking called the Do Ahead Gourmet. I think that as a child, as a teenager especially, I was embarrassed when people would raise their voices, and it made me feel different. In those days, it would never have occurred to me to say, "Oh, I'm your best friend. I want to hear everything you've got to say." But you need to remember, and I'll prod you if I miss a single word. I'm eager to hear you. It was never like that. It was about hiding it. So I evolved over the years, and we can even laugh about it and have the friendliest conversations about disabilities in general, which I think is a good human growth pattern that hearing impaired people gradually learn to live with.
Paula, what about you?
I remember when I had just one CI, when we went out for a dinner, I had to choose the perfect place to be. So it must be behind the walls because of the background noise. And that time, just with my right CI, I was always positioned like how do we say this in English? Satellite. Satellite, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I needed to understand what people were saying to me in a dark place, in a noisy place. And I remember I was always looking at Luciano like, please be my Google transcribe because it's hard. That's why one of the reasons I decided to do the second CI. And today my localization, my sound localization is much better in this kind of place. But I must say that after 2 drinks, I listen very well and my English is perfect and I'm the funniest person in the world.
I think one thing that Sigrid always insisted on is better lighting, because if you're going to lip read, you have to be able to see people. And so we would go to a lot of trouble to insist on turning the lights up and turning the music off, which sometimes caused a lot of hassle. So what about you, Donna? What kind of coping methods have you adopted?
I think I figured things out actually pretty early on. And one of the things that I used to do, because one of my first jobs, I did a lot of public speaking. And I would be on a stage, and at the time when I knew people would be asking me questions, I would walk off the stage and walk into the audience. And people thought I was being very interactive. But in reality, I was just trying to get close enough so that I could hear them and see their lips.
I do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, people just thought I was such a great speaker because I would do this. I was just comfortably in amongst them and moving around while I was talking. And I always had to have a mic in my hand, a remote microphone. So that would always be specified if I was going to be giving a talk somewhere. So I figured that out pretty quickly. I figured out where to sit in a room, so that I could hear people. I was working in a consulting capacity before the Americans with Disabilities Act. Before there were mechanisms to help someone in different settings. Vint, you would appreciate this. My husband went and set up, before there was an internet, a chat mechanism with one of my clients who was about an hour and a half away. And that's how I would talk to him because our relay services were so abysmal at that time. You never knew who you were going to get to type for you and if you would find someone or if you would be waiting. So I used technology even at that time. I used to record conversations on the phone. Greg reminds me of this. And then to be sure I hadn't missed something important, I would play it back later for him, and he would fill in the gaps that I had missed. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. At that point, I didn't know there was such a thing as a cochlear implant. I had no idea. And when I had some inkling that this technology exists, that was when this one doctor basically shut me down and said, I'm not going to talk to you about it because you're not a candidate until you have no hearing left. She never tested me. You're supposed to test someone in best data to see how they're doing with senses. She never did that. She just decided that I wasn't a candidate. So in my case, my internist was the one that did the research for me and told me where to go and told me who to see. And he became an advocate for cochlear implants for his patients. He kept materials in his desk drawer, and if he saw someone who he thought needed one, he would send them to me to talk to, and he would give them, information about where to go. I really feel like the awareness piece, at least in the US, is what is keeping people away from this technology. And unfortunately, the people who dispense hearing aids are not telling people that they're candidates. And it's extremely frustrating for us to see this and know that it's going on. So anyway, I'm kind of off topic from what Vint was asking about, but there were a lot of hacks. You said the word hacks earlier, Paula, but I think there were a lot of hacks that I was using to kind of just get along before the technology caught up for me.
Donna, you just mentioned the lack of awareness, and we all know, and you know very well, that it's a huge problem for hearing rehabilitation. But we see as doctors that lack of awareness inside medicine, and this is even worse, because if you think that pediatricians or other generalists that have the patients with hearing loss, and they never, sometimes they just heard about cochlear implants, they just heard about hearing aids, and I'm sure you work on that on ACI. I'm sure you work on that. We work on that on our projects, and lack of awareness to the general public, but even inside the medicine community, the medical community is a very big problem. And I don't know, it seems almost impossible to solve that problem. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I really agree with you. I'm going to tell you a true story. It's kind of funny in some ways and not in others. A few years ago, my mother was in the hospital for a long time. She had pneumonia, and she at that point was probably 89 years old, so it was quite serious. And so she would be in and out getting her chest x-rays done until she would recover from the pneumonia. And I was there one day waiting for her to come back. And there had been assigned to her a fourth-year medical student from a local medical school who was tracking her. She was in her elderly segment of her medical education. And so she was spending time with my mother to see, how she was recovering from pneumonia. And so I went in, and my mom wasn't there. And I said, so hi, Naomi, how are you doing? Have you had your segment yet on hearing loss? And she said, yes. And I said, did you learn anything about cochlear implants? And she said, no, but your mother told me that you had one, so now I know all about them.